This is part 5.
So I'm about to start cleaning the head. I've got a little cleaning station set up. I've got soapy water and rags. And then I've got some brushes too to get some of this grime out. I'm going to start and do one side at a time. And I'm going to start with this brush just to get some of this dust and stuff and these particles out of here. And then I can go through with the rags and get the grime off. So in these real gunky areas, I'm just going to spray a little spray of soapy water in there so it can soak in. While that's soaking, I'm just going to spray down my rag with soapy water. And I'm going to wipe down this valve cover. Okay, now that I've got the valve cover cleaned up a bit, I'm going to go down here and work on this real nasty stuff. Okay, so now that I've got the intake side of the cylinder head cleaned, I'm going to flip it over and do the exhaust side. The exhaust side isn't so bad because there wasn't as bad of an oil leak on this side. Now that I've got the exhaust manifold side cleaned, I'm going to do the piston side. So I think the main thing that was going on with the engine was there was oil getting into the spark plug holes here and then getting into the chamber and burning, because there's a lot of deposits that look like burnt oil. But then also you can see here, I have this cylinder pretty clean. I'm almost done with this one, and then this one I still have yet to clean, so that's kind of the stages right now. So now that my surfaces are all clean, I'm going to take this straight edge and I'm going to check the flatness. So now that I've got the head cleaned up, I'm going to remove the rocker arm assembly, which is along here. And I have to remove these bolts in a special sequence. The sequence is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now that all the bolts are off, I'm just gonna lift the assembly out. So I'm going to set it on this piece of cardboard, and I'm going to set them right next to each other, and I'm going to mark on my cardboard where the front is so that I can keep them organized. Now for the next rocker arm assembly. I believe this is intake side. Now I can get to the valves. This is the tool I made to get the valve keepers out. It's basically a socket, and on 3 sides I have magnets, and I'm going to put this over the valve spring and hit it with a hammer, and that'll knock the valve spring back, and these magnets will pull out the keepers. So I've got this little plant tray that's going to work perfectly for organization because it has 6 cells per row or per column. This way I have them all labeled for keepers, spring retainers, springs, and valves for intake and exhaust, and I can keep them separated. And then also I have an arrow to mark where the front of the engine is. Now I'm going to try and take out the intake keepers for the valve springs. Got both the keepers in there now. And then I can take the valve spring off. So I got all the keepers, the retainers, and valve springs out. I've got them organized in my little organization tray here. And now I'm about to take the valve seals off. For the valve seals, I have these special pliers that reach down onto the valve neck and grab the seal off. I'm going to start on the intake side. Whew. And there it is. Once you get all your valve stem seals out, you can then pull the valves out from the bottom side, and then we'll keep those organized as well. So now that I've got my valves out, I clean them up, and then now I'm going to clean up the valve mating surfaces. So I've got the intake and exhaust manifold tubes cleaned and the valve seats cleaned. Last thing I have to clean is the spark plug wells. The last thing I'm going to clean is these spark plug wells. And I've got like a screwdriver and a rag. And this is how I'm going to clean the threaded area. So I'm over here chasing this thread because when I try to thread this screw in, it gets stuck, and I don't want to strip out the threads. So I made a little thread chaser out of another bolt that fits these threads. So this is the thread chaser that I made. It's basically just a bolt with 2 grooves cut in it, and that'll clear any debris out of the hole so my threads won't get stuck. So I'm about to start putting the head back together, and the first thing I'm going to do is put the valves back in and put the valve stem seals on. And now for the intake valves. And I forgot to show earlier, but I actually have a little oil soaked part of my rag. And I'm just coating the stem in a light coat of oil before I insert it. Now I'm going to install the valve stem seals. These are the new seals that I have. And I also have this tool. The seal goes onto this end, and then you push it on like that. And this has a gap for the valve to go into. I'm going to pull my valves all the way up. Now that I got the seals on there to hold them in place. Just so there's no interference when I move the engine around, or when I move the head around. So now what I'm going to do is check my lash adjusters. And to do that, I'm just going to take them out and dip them in oil and just kind of feel if there's excessive play. So upon inspection of the lash adjusters, a few of them are actually broken. So they have this little collar right here, this black piece, and some of them the collar has broken off and actually kind of shredded itself. So I'm going to replace those now. To replace the lash adjusters, you're supposed to fill them with oil first. So I've soaked them in oil with the open side up so that any air can escape and oil can completely fill the lash adjuster before I replace them. And the lash adjusters go with this open side facing up, and this side right here will actually make contact with the top of the valve stem to push the valve down. Now I'm going to install the springs and the retainers with the keepers. So to get the keepers back in, I've got this filter fabric material, and the socket I was using to remove the keepers, I'm going to stuff it with that material, and then I'm going to put the retainers and the keepers on and hit them with the hammer. So I've got the retainers in there, and I've got this fabric stuff in my socket. So when I hit it with the hammer, it's going to force the spring down, and then this stuff is going to force the keepers down onto the valve stem. So I got the first pair of keepers in. This is a momentous occasion, and I'm actually using more of a finesse approach because I almost lost one of the keepers, and that would have been detrimental to the entire repair. I'm actually taking the spring retainer, my keepers, and try to get them both shoved in as much as I can. And then also I've got my thing here filled with foam instead of that fabric stuff. And then I match my foam up with the keepers. And then basically I'm just muscling into it. Okay, so I got all of the exhaust keepers on. Now I'm gonna do the intake side. So I've got all the valve spring retainers and the keepers in. I didn't lose one, which is nice. And I'm about to just wipe this off with a clean rag to get any grime out of these surfaces. And before I install the rocker arms, I'm just going to take some oil and put it on these journals, camshaft journals. That's the intake side, okay. Okay, I'm going to position this over the exhaust side. I'm using the Lash adjuster. Okay, so now I'm going to go for the intake side. So it's time to torque down the rocker arm shaft bolts, and to do that I'm going to use this one for the exhaust side, which is at 13 Newton meters, and this one for the intake side, which is at 30 Newton meters. These bolts get tightened in a sequence: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm going to do about a quarter turn at a time. I'm actually just tightening until I get resistance on each one. And I'm going to start torquing them down. I'm going to go through one more time and check the torque. Now I'm going to torque down these bolts, and these go in a sequence: 1, 2, 3, 4. So now what I'm going to do is take this file and this head bolt, and I'm going to cut some grooves in it to make it a thread chaser. I've got my grooves cut in it. So I also made a thread chaser out of a spark plug by cutting grooves on the threads. Now before I forget, I'm definitely going to chase these spark plug threads. So I wouldn't want to have spark plug blowout. So I just got done cleaning this gasket surface and I've wiped out the bores so there's no particles in the bore holes. And now I'm just going to run my thread chaser through the head threads, or through the head bolt threads on the block, just so I can make sure they're clean and not hanging up before I install the head. So I've got my new head gasket right here, but before I put it on, I'm just going to wipe this surface with a clean rag just to get off any remaining residues. So I'm going to take my gasket and I'm just going to line it up, and it should sit over the dowel pins and all the holes match up. Now that my gasket is in place, I've got to lift the cylinder head and try and locate it on these two dowel pins, and then set it down and try to do it evenly. I think I got it. So I'm going to put in the head bolts, but first I coated them in oil, fresh oil, and now I'm just going to thread them in by hand. This one's kind of binding, so I think I'm going to chase it once more. I just realized I forgot to put washers on my first two screws. Okay, so I got all the head bolts hand tight, and now I'm going to tighten them to about 20 Newton meters. I want to tighten them gradually. Okay. Now I'm doing it about 68 Newton meters, and I keep going. Okay, so I'll set my torque wrench to the final torque. I'm just gonna go for it. Okay, so now that I've torqued them to 108, I have to back them out and retorque them back to 108 because these are torque to yield bolts. So I've got all my bolts backed out completely. Now I'm about to retorque them. Now this is the final torque down. Now I'm just going to go through and confirm the torque. Make sure my setting is still good.
That concludes this part of the series. Don't forget to check the description for more information, and I'll see you in the next part.